should we be using empty houses to help solve our housing crisis at the moment, our housing shortage? So many people are struggling for rental homes, to buy a home, just to find accommodation. So should we be using the 100,000 empty homes across Australia for that purpose? 1300 295 222.
On ABC Radio Victoria, this is Jonathan Kendall.
Now, Australia has between 100,000 and 150,000 empty or abandoned homes, and most of those are in regional Australia. So why aren't we using them for people in desperate need of housing? Well, Prosper Australia is a non-profit research institute. Its advocacy director, Raina Fay, says while some homes are sitting empty, families are in desperate need for housing. Very good morning to you, Raina.
Good morning.
Why aren't these houses being used to house people who really need it?
Well, there's a number of reasons. People have empty homes because they've just inherited them and they don't know what to do with them, or they need to be developed or renovated or something to make for fit use. But there are a large number of houses that are simply sitting on the market, that are not sitting on the market, and they're being held empty for speculative gains. And those are the ones that we're really concerned about.
Okay. But my first thought was a lot of these houses, these empty houses, have been left to run down and wouldn't be suitable for people to live in. Like, is that the case for a lot of these houses?
Yeah, so our concern isn't the abandoned houses per se, but what they represent, because they point to a wider problem of speculation in our housing markets. We need people investing in housing, but a lot of what we see in the market is simply speculation on land price. And this is a particular issue on the outskirts of towns when land is banked for future development. And we see this this has been a really big problem because a lot of the government's response to solving the housing crisis is to release more land, release more land, release more land. But we know from our research that land banking is a huge problem, particularly in the greenfields, but within towns and cities as well.
So you're based in Central Victoria. Is it happening in towns and cities in Central Victoria?
Oh, absolutely. And what's been interesting is that we've been talking about efficient use of land for quite a long time now. Our speculative vacancies report, we've just released the 11th one. The government is responding, and so the government has introduced a vacant residential land tax, and that was updated last year. And in advance of that coming into force, we've seen, certainly the main towns near where I live, a number of sort of prominent vacant sites have either been developed or are being advertised for sale. And this is great because we want our land to be used in the best way that it can be used, because the cost of not using land effectively is things like homelessness.
So do you think that vacant land tax is not strong enough, or it's not working, or do we need other measures to make sure that there isn't as much land banking?
It's too soon to tell. I mean, we had quite major concerns with the first version of the tax. A lot of those have been addressed in the second version, but we want to see a good 3 years of that tax in place before we can sort of point and say, yeah, that's doing a good job. But our concern is that actually, how are we measuring this? Because our work around the speculative vacancies report only focuses on urban Melbourne. And it doesn't cover the rest of Victoria because we use water use as a proxy for vacancy, which you can't do in regional Victoria because far too many people are on tank supplies. It's just not an accurate way of measuring it. So we want to know, how is the government going to tell us if it's been effective or not? At the end of the day, we want that tax to make no money because there shouldn't be any empty homes.
Yeah. If you're just tuning in, it is 11 past 10. You're on ABC Victoria, statewide mornings. Raina Fay is with us from Prosper Australia. Raina's based Central Victoria and is talking about land banking. So people holding on to land or, property on land as a speculative measure, while there are families and people who just are desperately searching for homes right now. And we've got between 100,000 and 150,000 empty or abandoned homes in Australia. So just to summarise, Raina, you're not saying that people should be allowed to move into these empty or abandoned homes. You're just saying there should be more incentives for people, or there should be some rules to try and stop land banking. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, absolutely. We want to see broad-based land taxes as the most effective economic way of making sure that our land is best used, because land tax is a cost on holding land. If your land is not profitable enough to cover that cost, it should be sold to someone who can make better use of it, because the costs to the wider society of unproductive land are enormous. We've got 3 million people in Australia now at risk of homelessness. There's over 60,000 families, not just people, families on the Victorian public housing wait list. And that doesn't include the people who don't bother putting themselves on the list because they'll never get to the top of it. It's a huge problem, and the costs, particularly on children, are enormous. And when we look in regional Victoria, we've also got the issues around access to agricultural land for young farmers. We want people coming into farming, and land is their biggest cost. And if all of the smaller blocks around the edges of towns are being held for land banking, then how are they supposed to afford to get into farming?
Yeah. That's another tricky question. Raina, look, thank you for opening a can of worms with us this morning. Raina Fay, Advocacy Director with Prosper Australia.